Tom Harris had always believed that he had seen almost everything that the countryside could throw at a man. Years of working as a rancher had taught him patience, resilience, and the importance of keeping a clear head when facing the unknown. He knew the land like the lines on his own weathered hands, every ridge, every hollow, every hidden crevice. Yet, on this late autumn afternoon, as the orange sun dipped low behind the hills, a feeling of unease crept into him. An unfamiliar chill that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. The call had come early that morning from the town post office. The voice on the other end belonged to Maggie Caldwell, a widow known across the county not just for her remarkable height but also for her unusual presence in the community. People often said she moved through life like she belonged to another time, carrying herself with a quiet authority that few dared to challenge. When she asked for help, it was rare for anyone to refuse. Tom had known her casually for years, though he had never spent much time on her property. Still, when she asked him to come immediately, urgency tinged her words. By the time Tom reached the dusty road leading to her home, the sun had begun its slow descent, casting long, skeletal shadows across the fields. The wind carried the faint smell of wood smoke and fallen leaves. As he pulled up to the property, he saw Maggie standing by the edge of the barn, her frame taller than most women, her hair like silver threads against the fading light. Her eyes were wide and frightened, and she clutched something close to her chest. The sight of her in this state was unusual, even alarming. Tom dismounted from his truck, adjusting the brim of his hat, trying to offer a reassuring smile. "Maggie," he said in his steady voice, "what's going on? You sounded urgent on the phone." She hesitated, taking a deep breath, as if gathering courage to speak. "Tom, it's in the barn," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, don't pull it. I beg you. Whatever you do, don't touch it." Tom raised an eyebrow, a mixture of curiosity and concern twisting across his face. He had helped her with fences, with broken water pumps, with all manner of farm troubles. But this was different. Her words carried a weight, a fear that was hard to ignore. "Maggie," he said carefully, "I don't know what it is, but if it's dangerous, I'll be careful. I promise." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "It's not about danger, Tom. It's something else. Something I can't explain. Please, just leave it alone." Tom studied her for a moment. He had always respected Maggie, but there was something in her tone, a pleading that he couldn't dismiss. Still, the part of him that had spent decades fixing problems, solving puzzles, and facing hazards, told him he needed to see it. "Maggie, I'll look. I won't pull anything unless it's absolutely necessary. I just want to understand." She nodded, her shoulders trembling slightly. "You'll regret it if you do, I think. I've lived with it my entire life. My husband, he never wanted anyone to touch it." Tom didn't know the full story, but he could feel the weight of generations pressing down in her words. He followed her down the narrow path toward the barn, each step crunching on dried leaves and gravel. The barn itself was old, built decades ago with heavy timber beams that had darkened over time. Its red paint had faded to a dull rust color, and the roof sagged slightly in the middle. There was a sense of stillness surrounding it, almost as if the building itself were holding its breath, waiting. Inside, the barn smelled of hay, wood, and something faintly metallic, like old iron left in the rain. Dust motes floated lazily in the fading sunlight that streamed through cracks in the walls. Maggie led him to a corner where the object rested, partially hidden beneath a pile of hay and old farming equipment. Even from a distance, Tom could see that it was massive, larger than anything he had expected. Its surface was rough and irregular, almost organic in its shape, and it seemed to absorb the dim light, casting long shadows across the barn floor. "See, I told you," Maggie whispered, her voice shaking. "It's been in my family for as long as I can remember. My husband always said it must never be moved." Tom studied it carefully, his curiosity piqued. "What is it?" he asked. Maggie shook her head. "I don't know. Nobody knows. It's just been there. And it's never caused problems as long as no one touches it. Tom nodded slowly. He had dealt with strange machinery, old tools, and hidden stashes of forgotten items in barns before, but this was unlike anything he had encountered. The shape, the weight, the presence of it. It felt almost alive. He could see why Maggie was so afraid. She didn't just worry about the physical object. She seemed to feel its power, its history, and the consequences that might come from disturbing it. "I'll be careful," he said again, more to convince himself than her. "I'll just inspect it. I won't pull it out unless there's a reason." Maggie's eyes narrowed with worry, but she stepped back, giving him a little space. "Just be gentle and listen to it. You might hear things you weren't expecting." Tom frowned. He wasn't sure what she meant, but the unease in his stomach grew. He moved closer to the object, brushing away some of the hay that covered it. The barn seemed to grow quieter around him, as though the walls themselves were straining to listen. Dust swirled in the fading light, and for a moment he thought he saw the object shift slightly, though it might have been a trick of the shadows. He reached down, placing his hands on the rough surface. It was heavier than he imagined, solid yet strangely yielding under his touch. A shiver ran up his spine. Not from fear, but from the sheer presence of something so unusual and ancient. Maggie watched him closely, her hands clasped tightly together, knuckles white. "Please, don't pull it," she whispered again. Tom nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm not going to, not yet." He stepped back, studying it, trying to decide what to do next. The air in the barn felt thick, almost pressing against him. He could hear the creak of the old beams, the distant caw of a crow outside, and the faint rustle of something moving among the hay. His rational mind told him it was just the wind, just the settling of the barn. But a small part of him wondered if Maggie's warnings were more than superstition. For the next several minutes, Tom circled the object, inspecting it from every angle. There were no markings, no obvious function, no clue as to what it might be. Yet, it seemed impossible that something so large and solid could have been here for so long without anyone noticing or understanding it. The realization made him respect Maggie's fear even more. Some things, he thought, are left alone for a reason. As the sun disappeared completely behind the hills, shadows swallowed the barn in darkness, save for the dim light filtering through cracks in the walls. Maggie moved closer to him, her voice low but urgent. "I know curiosity is strong, Tom. But some things are not meant to be discovered. My husband knew it. I've lived by it. Please, just leave it be." Tom nodded slowly, feeling a mixture of respect, curiosity, and unease. He had faced many dangers before, but the fear that clung to Maggie, the history embedded in the object, and the oppressive silence of the barn told him that this was unlike anything he had dealt with. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that understanding it might be necessary, that ignoring it entirely might not be an option. He stepped back once more, brushing the sweat from his brow. The day was gone, night was falling, and the wind whispered through the open doors of the barn. Somewhere deep in the shadows, the object seemed to pulse faintly, almost imperceptibly, as if it were aware of him. Tom Harris, a man who had faced storms, wild animals, and accidents, felt an unfamiliar shiver of fear and anticipation. For the first time in years, he realized that not all problems could be solved with strength, tools, or experience. Some problems required patience, caution, and respect for forces beyond human understanding. And in that quiet, dimly lit barn, with Maggie's eyes filled with worry, Tom felt the weight of a decision that would change everything. He didn't know it yet, but the events of this evening would haunt him for years to come. A reminder that sometimes the most ordinary days could hide the most extraordinary mysteries, and that listening to a warning, even one that seemed strange or unfounded, could be the difference between safety and disaster. Tom couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over him since entering the barn. The dim light made the object seem larger, more imposing than it had appeared outside. Its rough surface caught the shadows in strange ways, making him question his own eyes. Maggie stood nearby, her towering frame tense, as if bracing herself for something she could not control. Her silver hair shimmered faintly in the low light, and her hands were clasped tightly, as though holding back some invisible force. "Tom," she whispered, "there's more to it than you can see. It's been part of my family for generations. My husband always said it must never be moved. He said it could change things if it left its place." Tom glanced at her, trying to read her expression. She looked frightened, but not panicked. Her fear was measured, almost reverent. He had seen people afraid of storms, of fire, even of accidents. But this was different. This was fear rooted in respect for something he couldn't yet understand. He nodded slowly. "I understand, Maggie. I'll be careful. I'm just trying to see what it is." She took a small step back, her eyes never leaving the object. "Careful isn't enough. Some things, they can't be handled like tools or machines. My husband knew that. I've lived by that knowledge. You must listen to it, Tom. You must feel it." Tom frowned slightly. He was a man of logic, of experience, of solutions that could be measured and fixed. But even he couldn't deny the weight in the barn, the almost tangible presence of the object that seemed to press against him. It felt as though the air itself had grown thicker, heavier, filled with a silent tension. He swallowed hard and crouched down to inspect the base, brushing away more hay and debris. The object was massive. Its shape was irregular, almost organic, like it had grown rather than been built. Its surface was rough but oddly smooth in places, as if worn down by time or use. It radiated a strange energy that Tom couldn't explain, a subtle vibration that seemed to hum faintly through his hands. He lifted his fingers, startled, and glanced at Maggie. She nodded slightly, as if confirming that he had felt it. "It's been here for decades," she said quietly. "No one knows where it came from. My husband didn't speak much about it, except to warn anyone who would listen. He said it was dangerous, in ways we can't understand. That's why I've kept it hidden, untouched, until now." Tom studied it carefully, his curiosity growing despite the knot of unease in his stomach. "Dangerous how?" he asked. Maggie shook her head. "I don't know exactly. Sometimes it changes things around it. People act differently near it. Animals act differently. The air feels heavier. My husband experienced it once, when he tried to examine it, and he never spoke of it again. He said some things are better left alone." Tom nodded slowly, his practical mind racing. He had faced hazards before, but this was unlike anything he had known. It wasn't just the object itself, it was the history, the fear, and the stories embedded in it. Something about the way Maggie spoke made him think that she truly believed in its power. She wasn't the type to exaggerate or tell tales. Her life had been one of hard work and quiet perseverance. "I'll be careful," he said again. "I'm not going to pull it or move it. I just want to understand it. That's all." Maggie's eyes narrowed, filled with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Understanding isn't enough," she said. "You must respect it. That is what my husband wanted most. If you handle it wrongly, you'll regret it. You don't know the half of it. You want it is wrong. With cames of wrongly, with given it. You all see you." Tom nodded, though he didn't fully comprehend what she meant. He circled the object slowly, examining it from every angle. The light from the barn's windows fell in slanted beams, illuminating patches of its rough surface and casting deep shadows in the crevices. He could see that it had been in the barn for a very long time. Layers of dust and dirt had settled over it, and hay had been piled carefully around its base. The more he looked, the more he realized it was not just a physical object, it carried a history. A story that had been silently observed and respected for decades. He crouched closer, running his fingers along one edge. The texture was strange, hard yet strangely smooth in places. He could feel tiny vibrations under his fingertips, subtle but unmistakable. His heart beat faster, not with fear, but with a growing sense of awe. He had worked with animals, machinery, and land for years, but this was different. It seemed alive in some way, though he could not explain it. Maggie watched him closely, her breathing shallow. "Do you feel it?" she asked. Tom paused, uncertain. I think so. It's like a hum. Faint. Almost like it's under the surface." She nodded slowly, relief washing over her features. "Yes, that's it. That's why it mustn't be moved. It responds to touch, to presence. It can sense things, intentions, maybe even thoughts. That's why my husband always said leave it alone." Tom leaned back slightly, wiping sweat from his brow. The barn had grown colder, though no wind blew inside. He could feel the shadows pressing closer, as though the object was drawing the darkness in. He glanced at Maggie. "I think I understand, at least a little. It's unusual. I've never seen anything like it." Maggie nodded. "You're brave to even be here, Tom. Most people wouldn't have dared. But now you know why I begged you. Why I said not to pull it. Some things are meant to remain in place. Their purpose is beyond our understanding. But their effects are real." Tom studied her, realizing that she wasn't exaggerating. He had spent his life solving problems, fixing things that were broken, helping neighbors with emergencies. But this was something he could not fix with tools or experience. This was something that required respect, patience, and an understanding that some forces are beyond human control. For the next few minutes, he moved around the barn carefully, observing the object and its surroundings. There were no obvious markings, no clues as to what it was or where it came from. Yet, the air around it felt different, heavier, charged, almost alive. He noticed the way the shadows shifted across its surface, the faint vibration under his hands, and the subtle change in temperature in the barn. It was clear why Maggie had lived in fear of disturbing it. Finally, Tom straightened up, brushing hay from his coat. "I won't move it," he said firmly. "I understand that some things are not meant to be handled without knowing the risks." Maggie exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Thank you, Tom. That is all I ask. Some things must be protected, even from those who mean well. My husband understood that. And now, so do I. You must understand that respecting it is safer than trying to understand it fully. The consequences, they are too great." Tom nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had always known that life on the ranch involved risks, but he had never faced something like this. It was not a threat in the traditional sense. There were no predators, no fire, no flood, but the sense of danger was undeniable. It was a quiet, creeping danger that came from the unknown, from history, and from forces he could not yet comprehend. He took one last look at the object, then at Maggie. The sun had fully set, leaving the barn in near darkness. Only the faint light from outside illuminated the corners, and the shadows stretched long and deep. Tom felt a chill run through him, a mixture of fear, respect, and curiosity. He realized that whatever this object was, it had been carefully guarded for a reason. Some mysteries, he thought, are not meant to be solved, only respected. Maggie's voice broke through his thoughts. "Tom, please, remember this. Some things in life are bigger than us, bigger than understanding, bigger than fear. The right thing is sometimes to leave them alone." Tom nodded silently, feeling the truth in her words. He had come here expecting to see an old relic, perhaps a forgotten piece of history. But what he found was something more, a reminder that not all mysteries are meant to be unraveled, and some warnings must be heeded, no matter how curious we are. As they left the barn, the cold night air hit them, and Tom shivered, though he tried to hide it. He glanced back at the shadows, the object still resting silently in its place. The unease remained, but so did a newfound respect for Maggie's life and the secrets she had protected. Tonight had shown him that courage is not always about action. Sometimes it is about restraint, listening, and understanding the limits of human knowledge. And as they walked back toward the house, Tom felt a quiet realization settle over him. This was only the beginning. There were stories embedded in that object, histories that he might never fully understand, and a fear that he would carry with him forever. But for now, he had learned the first, most important lesson. Some things are meant to remain untouched. The night had fallen fully over the Caldwell property, and the darkness seemed heavier than usual. Tom Harris had spent hours trying to shake the sense of unease that had settled deep in his bones. Even though he had left the barn, the memory of the massive object lingered in his mind like a shadow he couldn't escape. Maggie Caldwell had warned him repeatedly to respect it. But as a man used to confronting challenges head-on, curiosity gnawed at him relentlessly. He kept thinking about the subtle vibrations he had felt, the strange hum, and the inexplicable presence that had pressed against him as he touched it. Despite his attempts to ignore it, Tom found himself drawn back to the barn the next morning. The first light of dawn barely touched the fields when he walked along the familiar path, his boots crunching on frost-covered grass. Maggie was already outside, moving slowly as if she had sensed his approach. Her face looked pale in the morning light, and her tall frame seemed heavier with worry than usual. "You shouldn't be back here so soon," she said softly, her voice carrying a mix of fear and frustration. "I can feel it. The object knows you're thinking about it. That's never a good sign." Tom nodded, trying to remain calm. I need to understand it. Maybe if I study it more, I can help you protect it." Maggie shook her head, her silver hair catching the light. "You cannot help it, Tom. You can only leave it alone. That is all you can do. But I suppose if you insist on seeing it again, we should be careful." They walked to the barn together, and as soon as Tom stepped inside, the air felt different. It was heavier, charged with something he couldn't name. Dust hung motionless in the beams of sunlight that filtered through the cracks in the walls, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, as if the barn itself were alive. The object sat in its corner, as still and silent as before. Yet it seemed larger, more imposing, somehow aware of his presence. Tom moved closer, his heart beating faster. Every instinct in his body screamed caution. But the fascination was overwhelming. He reached out, intending only to touch it lightly, to feel the vibrations again. The moment his fingers brushed against the rough surface, a strange sensation rippled through him. A cold shiver ran down his spine, and he felt the barn grow colder around him, even though the sun was rising outside. Maggie gasped softly. "Stop. I warned you, do not provoke it." But it was too late. As Tom's hands pressed more firmly against the object, the barn seemed to shift. Shadows twisted unnaturally across the walls, and a low, almost inaudible hum began to fill the space. Tom's breath caught in his throat as he felt a pressure in his chest, like the air itself was pushing against him. The object seemed to pulse, subtle at first, then stronger, sending vibrations through his arms and legs. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence, a faint whisper, barely audible, that seemed to come from the object itself. Tom froze, straining to listen. It wasn't a word he could understand, but it was unmistakably a voice, low and urgent, filled with warning. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and a wave of fear crashed over him. Maggie stepped closer, placing her hands on his shoulders. "Do you hear it?" she asked urgently. "It's speaking to you. Listen, and do not resist. It can sense your thoughts, Tom. It can feel your intentions. If you pull it, it will react. And you may not like what happens." Tom nodded, though fear made it difficult to think clearly. The rational part of his mind tried to dismiss it: wind, echoes, his imagination, but the sensations in his body were undeniable. The object seemed alive, aware, and deeply connected to the world around it, in a way he could not comprehend. He felt the pull of its energy, a strange draw that was both terrifying and irresistible. Against his better judgment, Tom pressed a little harder, trying to lift it, just to test its weight. The barn trembled slightly under his effort, and a low creaking sound filled the air. Dust fell from the rafters, and the temperature seemed to drop further. Shadows stretched and shifted with unnatural speed, as though dancing to a rhythm only the object could hear. Tom felt a surge of adrenaline and fear, realizing too late that Maggie's warnings were not exaggerations. Suddenly, the object gave way. With a loud, metallic groan, it began to slide across the floor. Tom's eyes widened as the barn seemed to darken further, the shadows now almost tangible, twisting around him like smoke. A cold wind rushed through the open doors. Though there was no outside source, he stumbled backward, his heart pounding, as the vibrations from the object surged through his body. Maggie screamed, her voice echoing through the barn. "Stop! You must stop! Pull it back!" But the moment had passed. As the object shifted fully, the barn changed. The wooden beams groaned, and the air became thick, almost suffocating. Tom felt as if invisible hands were pressing against him, pushing him toward the center of the room. The shadows danced across the walls, forming shapes that made his stomach turn. He saw figures, or perhaps illusions, moving in the darkness, faint glimpses of people, animals, and strange forms he could not identify. The hairs on his arms stood straight up, and an icy dread settled over him. "Tom, it's angry," Maggie cried. "You have disturbed it. You must calm it. Or it will not stop." Fear gripped him fully now. The object, silent for decades, had awakened in a way he could not control. He realized that it was not simply a relic or an old artifact. It was something much older, more powerful, and far beyond human understanding. The energy in the barn was overwhelming, filling every corner, every shadow, every breath. As he struggled to regain control, Tom noticed movement outside the barn. The livestock, normally calm and predictable, were restless, their cries sharp and panicked. Even the wind seemed to howl with a strange voice, carrying sounds that made no sense, as if the world outside the barn itself were responding to the object's awakening. Tom's blood ran cold as he realized the consequences of his curiosity were not confined to the barn. He turned to Maggie, who was holding a small bundle of old cloth and herbs. "It's part of the tradition," she shouted over the roar of the barn's shifting energy. "We must perform the calming. It's the only way." With shaking hands, she began arranging the items around the object, murmuring words that Tom could not understand. The vibrations in the floor lessened slightly, though the shadows still twisted unnaturally. Tom helped as best he could, though he felt powerless against the force that had been unleashed. The object pulsed again, stronger this time, sending a shiver through his entire body. His breath came in short gasps, and for the first time in his life, he felt true terror. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. The barn seemed alive, reacting to their every movement. Each time they adjusted the herbs or the cloth, the pulsing lessened slightly. The shadows began to slow, and the air grew a little lighter. Tom realized that Maggie's knowledge of the object's history was the only thing keeping them safe. Every word, every gesture, every careful movement mattered. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the object settled. The vibrations faded. The shadows ceased, their frantic dance, and the cold, heavy air lifted. Tom sank to the floor, exhausted, sweat and fear mingling on his face. He looked at Maggie, who was breathing heavily but steady, her eyes filled with relief. It's calm again," she whispered. "For now. You must never touch it like that again. You almost brought disaster." Tom nodded, still trying to catch his breath. He realized that this was far beyond anything he had ever faced on the ranch. The object was alive in a way he couldn't comprehend, and its power was undeniable. He understood fully now why Maggie had pleaded with him not to touch it, why she had guarded it so carefully for decades. As they left the barn, the first rays of sunlight touched the fields, painting them in gold and shadow. The morning air was crisp and cool, but Tom still felt the lingering chill of fear and awe. He glanced back at the barn, where the object rested silently once more, and felt a mixture of respect, wonder, and dread. He had survived the encounter, but he knew he would never be the same. The events of that night and morning stayed with him, haunting his thoughts. He realized that some forces in the world cannot be controlled, that curiosity has limits, and that respect can sometimes be the only protection against the unknown. And though the object lay still, calm for now, Tom Harris understood that its power was always present, waiting, watching, and ready to remind anyone who dared to disturb it that some mysteries are not meant to be understood, only respected. The events of the previous night had left Tom Harris restless and shaken. Even after leaving the barn, the image of the massive object, the pulsing vibrations, and the twisting shadows haunted him. Every time he closed his eyes, he could feel the cold pressure that had pressed against him, the sense that the barn itself had been alive and aware of his presence. Maggie Caldwell, though exhausted and worried, seemed steadier now, but the worry lines on her face betrayed the strain of protecting something that had existed beyond comprehension for generations. Tom returned to the Caldwell property the next day, not out of curiosity, but because he knew the object still needed to be secured. Maggie had insisted that it could not remain in a place where it might be accidentally disturbed again, and Tom understood the gravity of her concern. As he approached the barn, the morning sun cast long shadows across the fields, but the unease in the air persisted. He could almost feel the object watching him from inside, and it made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Maggie was waiting by the barn door. Her posture was tense, and her eyes flickered toward the shadows that seemed to linger at the edges of the building. "We have to finish this properly," she said quietly. "The ritual we perform must be complete, or the object's energy may continue to be unstable. You've seen what happens when it reacts. We cannot take chances." Tom nodded. He had learned enough to understand that this was no ordinary object, no relic to be stored away in a barn and forgotten. Its energy was alive, responsive, and dangerous if mishandled. He followed Maggie into the barn, the old wooden boards creaking beneath their feet. Dust motes floated in the slanted beams of sunlight, and the air was thick with tension. The object rested in its corner, calm but pulsing faintly, as if aware of their approach. Maggie began arranging the items needed for the ritual. Small bundles of herbs, cloths worn smooth by time, and old symbols etched into wooden blocks. Each movement was deliberate, precise, and filled with meaning. Tom watched carefully, helping where he could, though he knew he could not interfere with her knowledge or intent. He realized that every step mattered. Every placement of an object, every whispered word contributed to calming the immense energy within the barn. As they worked, the shadows seemed to shift in subtle ways. Light bent differently around the object, and the air pulsed gently with the rhythm of the ritual. Tom felt a sense of reverence he had never experienced before. This was not merely an object to be moved or studied, it was something alive, something with a history that demanded respect. He felt his own pulse slow, his previous fear mingling with awe, and a quiet determination to see this through safely. Maggie murmured words he could not understand, her voice low and steady, yet powerful in its own quiet way. The object responded to her, the vibrations under Tom's hands softening, the cold pressure in the barn easing slightly. The shadows on the walls ceased their frantic movements and became still, almost obedient. Tom realized that this ritual was more than a tradition. It was the language through which humans could communicate with something beyond their comprehension. Minutes stretched into an hour as they continued, carefully performing each step. Tom helped lift the object just enough to adjust its position, careful not to disturb it unnecessarily. The energy in the barn seemed to settle, though faint pulses still traveled through the air, reminding him that the object was alive, aware, and powerful. Maggie worked with quiet focus, her movements graceful despite the tension, and Tom could feel her respect for the object in every action she took. Finally, the last step of the ritual approached. Maggie stood before the object, her hands raised slightly, and she whispered a series of words that seemed to resonate in the very walls of the barn. The object pulsed one last time, and then, as if satisfied, it became still. The vibrations stopped, the shadows flattened, and the heavy air lifted. Tom exhaled deeply, relief washing over him like a wave. For the first time since he had arrived, he felt the barn relax, the tension dissolving into quiet calm. "It's done," Maggie said softly, her voice filled with relief. "It will remain calm for now. But remember, Tom, it must never be disturbed again. Its energy is strong, and its memory is long. Those who fail to respect it may face consequences they cannot imagine." Tom nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He understood now that the object was not just a curiosity or a mystery. It was a force, ancient and powerful, that demanded respect above all else. It had been part of Maggie's family for generations, and she had protected it with her life. Now, with the ritual complete, he felt a deep sense of gratitude and awe for her courage and knowledge. As they left the barn, the sunlight streamed into the open doors, warming their faces and casting the fields in gold. The morning air was crisp and refreshing, but Tom still felt a lingering chill, a reminder of the power they had just encountered. He glanced back at the barn, where the object rested silently, calm for the first time in decades. He realized that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only respected, and that courage often comes not from confronting the unknown recklessly, but from understanding its limits and knowing when to act with care. Over the next few days, Tom returned to his own ranch. But the memory of the Caldwell barn and its mysterious object remained with him. He spoke little of it to anyone, knowing that few would understand and fewer still would believe. But the experience had changed him profoundly. He approached his work with a new sense of humility, aware that the world held forces beyond human comprehension, and that respect for the unknown could be just as important as strength and skill. Maggie, for her part, continued her quiet life, tending her property and keeping the object safe. She occasionally glanced toward the barn, her eyes filled with the weight of generations of knowledge and the relief of knowing that it had been properly protected. Her trust in Tom had been tested, and he had proved himself capable of understanding not just the object, but the deeper lesson it represented: that some things must be approached with reverence, caution, and respect, and that the true measure of courage is knowing when not to act rashly. Weeks later, Tom found himself thinking back to the events with a mixture of awe and disbelief. He had faced storms, wild animals, and accidents on the ranch, but nothing had prepared him for the quiet, overwhelming power of the object in Maggie's barn. He realized that his life, his understanding of the world, and his sense of what was possible had expanded in ways he could never have imagined. He had glimpsed a force beyond human comprehension, and he knew that the lessons it had taught him would remain forever. As the sun set over the hills, casting long shadows across his own land, Tom felt a profound sense of respect for the mysteries that exist quietly in the world. Some forces are not meant to be conquered or fully understood. He thought they are meant to be honored, protected, and treated with caution. The Caldwell barn, the object within it, and the courage of Maggie Caldwell had shown him that bravery is not always about action, but about restraint, respect, and understanding the limits of human knowledge. Tom often returned to the site, not to touch the object again, but to check that it remained undisturbed. Each visit reinforced the lessons he had learned, and each time he left, he carried with him a sense of awe and humility. The story of the object, its power, and the ritual that calmed it, became a silent memory, one he shared with no one but himself. It was a reminder that some mysteries are sacred, that respect can prevent disaster, and that true courage lies in understanding one's place in the face of forces far greater than oneself. Years later, when he recounted the events in his own mind, he did so with a mix of fear and reverence. The memory of the pulsing energy, the shifting shadows, and the cold, pressing air never fully left him. Yet, alongside the fear, there was gratitude for the experience, for Maggie's guidance, and for the opportunity to witness something so extraordinary. He had survived, but more importantly, he had learned a lesson that would guide him for the rest of his life. that some things are better left untouched, and that the wisest action is sometimes restraint. And so, the object remained in the Caldwell barn, silent and still, a presence that watched and waited, respected by those who understood its power. Tom Harris returned to his life on the ranch, carrying with him the knowledge that not all mysteries are meant to be solved, and that sometimes the greatest courage is knowing when to step back, listen, and honor the unseen forces that shape the world around us. The experience left his blood cold in ways he could never forget. But it also left his mind open, his heart humble, and his respect for life, history, and the unknown stronger than ever.